A new discovery in Egypt is raising one of the biggest questions in archaeology. Have scientists finally found the tomb of Queen Nefertiti? For years, her burial place has remained one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. Now, new scans and research suggest that something unusual may be hidden behind the walls of one of the most famous tombs ever discovered. And if this theory is correct, it could change what we know about ancient Egypt. The story begins in the Valley of the Kings, the burial ground of many Egyptian pharaohs, including the young King Tutankhamun. In 1922, Howard Carter stood before the final stone doorway, separating him from something he had spent nearly a decade searching for. When candlelight entered the chamber, gold seemed to flash from every direction. More than 5,000 artifacts lay inside, many of them almost perfectly preserved after 3,000 years. It became one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But Carter noticed something strange almost immediately, and it had nothing to do with the gold. The tomb was too small. Tutankhamun ruled for nearly a decade. He was a pharaoh, the ruler of an entire empire, yet his final resting place was surprisingly modest compared with other royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Some kings who ruled for less time were buried in far larger complexes. The architecture of Tutankhamun's tomb looked like something prepared in a hurry rather than a monument planned from the beginning of his reign, as was customary for Egyptian pharaohs. The second detail was even stranger. Immediately after entering the tomb, the passage turns to the right. This is not the usual arrangement associated with the burial of a king. Egyptologists have noted that this type of orientation is more commonly associated with burial chambers, intended for royal women such as queens and princesses rather than pharaohs. Then there were the artifacts. Among the nearly 5,000 objects discovered inside, a significant number showed signs that they may not originally have been made for Tutankhamun. Some appear to have been altered or adapted for his burial. The entire tomb gives the impression of a hurried arrangement, rather than a royal funeral prepared over many years as Egyptian tradition would normally have demanded. For almost a century, these details remained buried in academic records. They were mentioned as curious irregularities, but little more could be done. Researchers had no way to investigate beyond what could be seen with the human eye. That changed when modern technology finally entered a chamber that had remained sealed for more than 3,000 years. Ground-penetrating radar does not physically disturb the structure. It sends signals through the stone and measures what returns. That is why the technology became one of the few tools archaeologists were willing to use inside a fragile structure like Tutankhamun's burial chamber, where even a small mistake could permanently damage priceless wall paintings. When high-resolution scans were carried out, the results sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Behind the northern and western walls of the burial chamber, two areas that had long been assumed to consist of completely solid rock, the radar appeared to detect empty spaces. These did not look like small cracks. They did not appear to be simple interference. They were areas with unusually regular shapes, the kind of geometry archaeologists immediately associate with structures created by human hands, rather than formations produced naturally in the rock. For anyone familiar with Egyptian tombs, a geometric void behind a wall suggests one of two possibilities. It could be a corridor leading somewhere else, or it could be a chamber that was deliberately sealed and hidden from view. Either possibility leads to the same question. What is behind that wall? Within days, the news spread around the world, and one name began appearing almost immediately across scientific reports and media coverage: Nefertiti. To the general public, the connection might seem like little more than an intriguing possibility, but to Egyptologists, the name carries enormous significance. Among the greatest mysteries still surrounding ancient Egypt is a question that has remained unanswered after more than a century of research. Where was one of the most powerful queens of the 18th dynasty buried? Nefertiti was no minor figure in Egyptian history. She was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the ruler behind one of the most radical religious transformations of the ancient world. During his reign, the royal court elevated the worship of a single solar deity, Aten, above Egypt's traditional pantheon. Nefertiti's face, immortalized in the famous limestone bust discovered in 1912, has since become one of the most recognizable images from ancient Egypt. For more than a century, it has appeared in museums, educational materials, and popular culture around the world. A woman of such extraordinary status should, according to everything we know about Egyptian royal burial traditions, have received a tomb worthy of her position. It should have been documented, protected, and honored in a manner comparable to the royal figures of her time. But that tomb has never been found. And it is not because archaeologists failed to look. For decades, researchers have searched across the Valley of the Kings and nearby royal burial grounds, yet no site has ever been conclusively identified as the final resting place of Nefertiti. For a civilization famous for recording its rulers in extraordinary detail and honoring the dead through monumental architecture, her complete disappearance from the archaeological record is remarkably difficult to explain. That missing piece of history is exactly what made the apparent radar voids behind Tutankhamun's walls so important. They were not simply strange signals on a scanning screen. They seemed to connect directly with a mystery Egyptologists had been trying to solve for generations. Could Nefertiti herself be resting somewhere beyond those walls? The researcher who pushed that question further than almost anyone else was Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves. Reeves spent months studying extremely detailed photographs of Tutankhamun's burial chamber, examining every inch of the walls and searching for anything that might be concealed beneath the ancient painted surface. The work demanded extraordinary patience. Every crack and every subtle change in texture could represent an architectural clue or simply damage caused by 3,000 years of age. Then he found what he was looking for. Beneath the plaster covering the walls were faint lines that Reeves interpreted as traces of two former doorways. In his view, those entrances had later been sealed and carefully disguised beneath the painted decoration that visitors see today. From this observation, Reeves developed a remarkable theory. He proposed that the famous burial chamber of Tutankhamun, known around the world, might actually represent only the outer portion of a much larger tomb. Behind the western wall, he argued, could be a hidden storage chamber, and beyond it may lie something far more significant. The original burial chamber constructed before Tutankhamun's death, perhaps for Queen Nefertiti herself. In other words, Reeves was not proposing that one tomb simply stood beside another. He was proposing that one tomb existed inside another, a structure completely concealed within the very monument the world had believed it understood for nearly a century. What made this theory powerful enough to spread around the world was not simply the faint outlines visible in the photographs. It appeared to explain almost every unusual detail researchers had documented over the years. The tomb was unusually small for a pharaoh. Its right-turning layout resembled that of a royal woman's burial. Many of its artifacts showed signs of reuse, and now radar appeared to detect empty spaces in almost exactly the locations Reeves had identified. Pieces that had remained disconnected for nearly a century suddenly seemed to fit together into a single coherent picture. For many researchers and for much of the public, this no longer looked like a distant possibility. It seemed to offer an answer to one of the most persistent mysteries in Egyptian archaeology. But no matter how logical a theory may appear, it still has to survive testing by the very technology that helped create it. That testing began soon after Reeves presented his hypothesis to the wider world, and for a brief period everything seemed to be moving in the direction he had predicted. In 2015, a specialist conducted additional scans and believed he had detected clear evidence of a hidden chamber. The announcement immediately became international news. At the time, there was a growing sense that one of the greatest mysteries in Egyptology might finally be solved within our own generation. But only a year later, another team returned with different radar equipment, and the results pointed in the opposite direction. They found no convincing sign of a concealed doorway. There was no sufficiently clear evidence to confirm the existence of any chamber behind the wall. This was not simply an isolated technical problem. Later surveys using different radar systems and different methods continued to produce conflicting results. Some appeared to support the possibility of hidden spaces. Others found nothing persuasive enough to confirm them. Archaeologists became divided between opposing interpretations, and neither side had enough evidence to end the debate. The problem lies partly in the limitations of the technology itself. Ground-penetrating radar performs well in soil and relatively uniform structures. But ancient natural limestone filled with fractures, cavities, and geological irregularities can produce signals that are difficult to interpret even with modern equipment. An empty-looking region on a radar image does not automatically mean that a human-built chamber exists there. The path that once seemed to lead directly toward an answer had reached a dead end. There was not enough evidence to confirm Reeves's theory, but there was also not enough certainty to completely rule it out. Then, just as attention began moving away from the walls of the tomb, an entirely different clue started attracting researchers. This one was not hidden underground. It was sitting directly on the face of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's golden mask is perhaps the most recognizable image from the entire civilization of ancient Egypt. Standing more than 1.5 feet tall and weighing more than 22 pounds, the mask is made largely from gold alloy and decorated with precious stones and colored glass. It is widely regarded as one of the great masterpieces of ancient metalwork. For decades, almost no one questioned who the mask had been created for. To the public, the answer seemed obvious: Tutankhamun. But research published in 2015 challenged that assumption. The clue was hidden in the royal name inscribed on the mask, inside what Egyptologists call a cartouche, the oval frame used to contain the names of Egyptian royalty. Under specialized lighting and close examination, researchers reported evidence suggesting that Tutankhamun's inscription may not have been the original one. Beneath the visible name were traces of an earlier inscription that appeared to have been erased and replaced. Some specialists argued that the surviving traces could be reconstructed as a royal name associated with Nefertiti. This idea was not based entirely on speculation. Egyptian history contains numerous examples of royal names being altered or replaced, particularly during periods of political change or when burial equipment had to be reassigned after an unexpected death. A second detail added to the debate: the pierced ears of the mask. In ancient Egyptian art, earrings and pierced ears were commonly associated with children and royal women, while their appearance on representations of adult kings was less typical. Tutankhamun died at around 18 or 19 years old when his facial features would already have reached adult form. If the mask had been designed specifically for him at that stage of his life, some researchers argue that the pierced ears are an unusual detail. Combine this with another important fact: Tutankhamun died young and apparently unexpectedly. Preparing a complete royal burial traditionally required enormous amounts of time, labor, and specialized craftsmanship. If his death came before a full set of funerary equipment had been completed, objects originally intended for other members of the royal family may have been adapted for his burial. Suddenly, the possibility surrounding Nefertiti moved beyond the question of a hidden chamber somewhere behind a stone wall. Her name had entered another line of investigation, one that could potentially be examined through inscriptions, manufacturing techniques, and material analysis. When all of these pieces are placed side by side, a more careful picture begins to emerge. It is less dramatic than some of the claims that spread across the internet, but it is far more useful. As for the theory of the hidden chamber behind Tutankhamun's burial chamber, there is currently no evidence strong enough to confirm that such a room exists. Several detailed surveys conducted after Nicholas Reeves first proposed the idea failed to identify a definite doorway or concealed chamber. That does not mean the possibility has been eliminated entirely. The Valley of the Kings is an enormously complex archaeological landscape, and modern technology continues to reveal previously unknown features in and around ancient burial areas. But based on the evidence available today, the chamber remains a hypothesis, not a confirmed discovery. The debate surrounding the golden mask is different. Researchers have identified signs that parts of the mask may have been altered, including evidence associated with its royal inscriptions. These physical details can be examined directly through imaging and material analysis, rather than relying entirely on the interpretation of ambiguous radar signals. They strengthen the possibility that some of Tutankhamun's burial equipment had a history before it entered his tomb. The most accurate answer based on the evidence currently available is this: there is no confirmed proof that Nefertiti's tomb lies hidden behind the walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber. But there are serious reasons to investigate whether some of the most iconic objects associated with the young pharaoh, including his famous golden mask, may originally have been created or modified for another royal figure. And that means the mystery of Nefertiti's true resting place is far from over. It has simply changed direction. The search has moved from a stone wall beneath the Valley of the Kings to physical clues preserved on one of the most famous royal objects ever discovered. Somewhere within those altered inscriptions, reused artifacts, unexplored spaces, and future archaeological surveys, the complete answer may still be waiting. And when the next generation of scanning and analytical technology arrives, it may finally be precise enough to reveal what more than a century of excavation has not.